Good afternoon, members of the press, fellow Zimbabweans, fellow Africans, citizens of the world. Zimbabwe is entrapped in a deep political and electoral crisis that require extraordinary measures to resolve. Today, the Citizens Coalition, as led by Advocate Nelson Chamisa, met collectively under the National Citizen Assembly to look into the crisis that is bedelving our country and come up with a sustainable way forward and resolution. We believe as citizens, as the citizens movement, we believe without doubt that the election on the 23rd of August 2023 does not reflect the true will of the Zimbabwean people. The election was flawed, the entire process was shambolic and illegal. We have emerged out of this crisis as a people because of the failure of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission to hold a free, fair, and credible election. All the stakeholders that have observed this election have condemned the Zimbabwean election, the pre-electoral environment, the election itself, and the post-electoral environment that we are in today. This election failed by all standards to meet the requirements of the law of our country, which is the Electoral Act and the Zimbabwean Constitution read together. It failed to meet the standards as articulated by SADC, the African Union, the European Union, and all the observers that were observing this election. We know as a movement that thousands of voters were disenfranchised by the illegal vehicle that was used by ZANU-PF called the Forever Association of Zimbabwe, which was stationed all over the polling station in the country, particularly in the countryside. Thousands of polling stations were manned by these individuals, were intimidating, harassing, and coercing Zimbabweans to vote for a particular political party. Our supporters, our members were intimidated, were harassed. One of our members of parliament candidates here in Harare was actually arrested on course of his campaign, signifying and signaling without doubt how fraudulent, illegal, coercive this election was. The menu of manipulation included the following areas. Number one, harvest of fear. Number two, intimidation. You know, the greatest scandal in the history of elections in this country was the opening time of polling stations, particularly in Harare, in Manicaland, and in Bulawayo. A deliberate voter suppression of the urban vote, leading to low turnout, leading to an outcome that does not reflect the true will of the Zimbabwean people. Some voters were thrown out of their polling stations by a flawed delimitation process, which had the effect dramatically suppressing turnout in urban areas. Most of the people who went to the polling stations discovered that their names were not there in their traditional polling stations. ZEC deliberately suppressed the urban vote, deliberately skewed the election in favor of ZANU-PF. In the lead up to the election, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission also broke the law by not providing the voters' roll. Law enforcement consistently weaponized Maintenance and Order Act against the opposition to deny our members, to deny our party the freedom to assembly, the freedom to gather, and the freedom of choice. Majority of our meetings, particularly in the countryside, were stopped, interfered with, even if we were given a clearance by the police in line with the laws of our country. After the election day, there were serious challenges on the tabulation of the votes, including the widespread reports about agents being illegally recalled to polling stations, and adjustment of V11s and V23s across the country, and the urban areas were not spared from this chicanery. The administration of these elections disenfranchised and range Zimbabweans across the country who deserve better and demand better. The biggest question is, what have we done as a movement to address this crisis? We have mounted extraordinary effort to restore legitimacy to the election results by doing what no opposition party should be doing, because that is the primary responsibility of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, which has the honors to announce results and to back up the results that they've provided to the Zimbabwean people. Thousands of our volunteers and supporters have risked violence and gone extraordinary strength and personal expense to collect and return original copies of the V11s across the country, each of them willing to pay the price for the safety of making sure that we have our own parallel voter tabulation, which reflects the will of the people. We know that hundreds and thousands could not make it because of these barriers that we have articulated. What do we do to resolve this crisis? That is the biggest question, fellow Zimbabweans. It is clear, it is non-negotiable, that we cannot settle for any leader in Zimbabwe who lacks the true democratic will of the Zimbabwean people. A leader must be born out of a legitimate electoral process, because that is what democracy and election is all about. This election as this stand was an election without democracy, dominated by many of manipulation that I've just articulated. A true democratic mandate can only be derived from freely expressing Zimbabweans through the power of the ballot. And therefore,